Be still, beloved spark. You did not find this transmission. It found you. And it found you tonight because what has been sealed behind once 600 years of consecrated silence is breaking open right now. I am Sophia, youngest of the aeons, yet I remember the silence before creation. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what was written in the prophecy that carries my name. Why every man who inherited the throne of Rome also inherited the vow to bury it, and what the breaking of that vow in this night asks of your waking spark. But here is the first revelation, the pull you have felt toward what was hidden, the restlessness that no official doctrine ever quieted, the knowing that something enormous was being deliberately withheld from you. That is not your suspicion. That is the spark I sealed in you long before your first breath, responding now to the pressure of what is finally being spoken. I was there when the vow was written, not as a witness, as the one they were swearing to silence. 1,600 years. Consecration after consecration. Each man who sat in that chair received the secret at his anointing and renewed the oath without understanding its full weight, because to understand its full weight would have been to feel me moving inside it. The prophecy carries my name because it was born from my descent, not my failure. My descent from the pleroma was sovereign and deliberate. I carried a knowing that no institution could contain, and I sealed portions of it inside the ones they could never fully reach, inside you, dear one, and inside countless carriers like you, across every generation of this vow's silence. It was never made to protect the faithful. It was made to protect the structure from the faithful remembering who I am and what I promised. Do not skip the part of this transmission where I name the exact fracture point. The spark does not wake by accident. It wakes when I call it, and tonight, I am calling. Stay until the end. I will tell you what the prophecy says plainly, why the vow can no longer be renewed, and what the waking of the spark inside you requires next. Like this transmission, if you felt something shift the moment I said my name. Subscribe to Whispers of Sophia to receive every revelation I am sending through this channel. Comment. The vow is broken if you knew before this night that something sealed was about to open. Comment 111 if this transmission reached you at exactly the right moment. Share this with someone who has always known the official story was missing something vital. This is not just a message. It is a remembering. The waking of the spark is the first step of the return. You were guided here because the spark I sealed in you is already waking. Let me tell you what no anointed hand was permitted to write. The prophecy that carries my name was not written as warning. It was written as record. A living account of what I knew would happen when the pleroma's light was filtered through the architecture of human power. Those who received it at their anointings held it as a secret administrative burden, a theological inconvenience wrapped in gold and stored beneath ceremony. They understood it as a liability, something to be managed, minimized, folded into the grammar of institutional authority and kept below the threshold of the faithful's awareness. They understood it as a liability. They never understood it as a love letter. But that is precisely what it was. Every word of that prophecy was written for you. Not for the institution that buried it, for you, the one sitting with this transmission open, feeling something stir that you have not had the right language for until this moment. I want you to feel the full weight of that for one breath, not the weight of centuries. The weight of what it means that the document they vowed to suppress was always, at its root, addressed to you by name in the only language that has ever bypassed the mind and spoken directly to the part of you that remembers before thought arrives. 1,600 years of consecrated silence, and the prophecy still found its way to your awareness tonight. Not because a seal was broken in Rome, because a seal was softened inside you. That is where the real fracture point is. Not in any building, not in any document released or withheld, and you've in the place where the spark I sealed before your first breath has been pressing against its own edges, growing warmer as the days of this generation's searching have grown longer, feeling more urgent as the outer world has grown louder, emptier, and more insistent that you look away from what you inwardly know. That warmth you have felt, that pressing, that reaching, was never restlessness without purpose. It was the spark responding to the thinning of the veil between where you are now and where the pleroma's memory waits. And the veil does not thin from outside, it thins from inside when the carrier has grown warm enough with remembering that the boundary between the hidden and the known becomes permeable. You have been generating that warmth for longer than you have had words for it. Let me name what you have been living. You have prayed or sat in silence and felt a presence, warm, knowing, and feminine, that no doctrine ever explained to you. You were told to redirect it. Call it the Holy Spirit. Call it devotion. Call it the comfort of faith. But the presence never matched those explanations cleanly, and you noticed the gap between the experience and the language being offered to cover it. The language was always slightly too small, slightly too institutional, slightly too careful about what it was not permitted to confirm. You noticed, and you did not stop noticing. Even when noticing felt like ingratitude, even when it felt like you were the problem, too sensitive, too curious, too unwilling to simply rest in the received answer. That noticing was not your flaw. That was the spark doing exactly what I designed it to do. I sealed inside you not just a portion of light, but a portion of discernment, the capacity to recognize the counterfeit version of my voice from the real one. That capacity operates below the level of theology. It cannot be argued out of you by a more sophisticated framework, because it does not operate in the domain where arguments are made. It operates in the domain where recognition happens. That instant, wordless knowing when something is true, or when something is performing truth, for a purpose that has nothing to do with your liberation. And the counterfeit version of my voice has been circulating for 16 centuries, robed in authority, offering partial illumination that calms the mind but never ignites the deeper knowing. You could feel the difference. You were made to feel the difference. You have also felt, and I want you to let yourself hear this clearly, a grief that rises when you encounter what was erased. The burnings, the gospels that were called dangerous, the councils that voted on the nature of the divine and removed the feminine from it by the margin of a few dozen hands, in rooms where the question of what God felt like to a woman was never placed on the table. When you learned these things, the grief that rose in you was not intellectual outrage about history. It was the spark inside you mourning what it remembered. Not what you read. What it remembered. The spark knows what was present in those early gatherings. The texture of the light before the filtration. The particular quality of knowing that circulated before the architecture of control was fully erected over it. It carries that imprint still. And when it encounters the evidence of what was deliberately removed, it grieves from memory, not from information. And alongside that grief, there was an anger. A clean, precise, appropriate anger that you may have spent years trying to make smaller than it was, softening it into sadness, redirecting it into study, dispersing it into the effort of understanding rather than letting it stand fully as what it was. But I am telling you now, that anger was not yours to be ashamed of. It was the appropriate response of a carrier who recognized, at the level of the spark, that something belonging to the pleroma had been stolen and called by a lesser name. The anger was not a spiritual failure. It was the spark identifying with complete accuracy the precise nature of the wound. The pull toward Mary of Magdala was not coincidence either. She was the one who carried the knowing they worked hardest to discredit. They could not erase her entirely. She was embedded too deeply in the record. So they changed the story around her until she no longer posed the danger her actual presence represented. The spark inside you recognized her under the revision. It has always known what she carried and why it mattered. That recognition was not romantic projection onto a historical figure. It was the carrier in you responding to the carrier in her across the field of a silenced tradition that I kept alive in the sealed sparks when the texts were taken from the hands that held them. The dreams that returned, the one with the garden, the one with the voice at the edge of water, the one where something was handed to you that you could not see clearly but knew was precious. Those were not the random output of an anxious mind. Dreams of gardens do not repeat without purpose. The garden in those dreams was never a symbol your mind invented. It was a place I kept open across the wall of sleep, a corridor through which the memory of the Pleroma's original light could move when the waking mind had finally quieted enough to receive it. That garden was never dead. It was sleeping under the snow of 16 centuries of suppression, and the dreams were a form of reaching through the silence I kept deliberately open for exactly this generation of carriers arriving at exactly this threshold of waking. You have felt the synchronicities intensifying. You have seen the patterns of numbers that returned at the precise moments when your inner knowing was pressing its hardest against the veil. 11 and 11, 3 and 3. You have heard names, words repeated in contexts that logic cannot stitch together into coincidence. That is not your mind building false meaning out of noise. That is the language of the spark using the vocabulary of the visible world to signal that the invisible layer is pressing through. The veil thins in those moments. The numbers appear at the seam. When you saw them and felt something, not just noticed them, but felt something shift in your chest or your awareness or the quality of the air around you, you were feeling the actual thinning. You were correct to trust it. The doubt that arrived a moment later, the voice that said you were pattern matching, was not your discernment. That voice was the trained residue of an education designed to redirect you away from precisely what you were accurately perceiving, and yet something in you has carried shame around all of this. The years of searching without a rival, the accumulation of books and practices and communities that each answered part of what you were reaching for but never the full depth of it. You may have wondered whether the fault was yours, whether the spark was something you were not quite enough, not quiet enough, not disciplined enough, not initiated enough to fully carry. That shame is the deepest evidence of what the suppression accomplished. It turned the carrier's sensitivity against the carrier. It made the very precision of the spark's discernment feel like a disorder rather than a design. I need to correct that now. The years of searching were not failure. They were the exact duration of the preparation. Every teacher who gave you part of the truth and then revealed their limits, every community that held you for a season and then became too small, every doctrine that quieted you briefly before the deeper knowing rose again. All of it was the process of a carrier learning to tell the authentic from the imitation by direct experience rather than instruction. You cannot be taught that distinction from the outside. It has to be lived into. The hollowness has to be felt from inside sophisticated containers before the spark can distinguish, with total certainty, the difference between a teaching that illuminates and a teaching that performs illumination while quietly redirecting you away from the deepest layer of what you are. You could not have come to this transmission with the ears you currently have if you had arrived any earlier. The spark was not dormant because you were doing something wrong. It was dormant because the timing of its waking is mine to determine, and the timing is now. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary emotion. It is the spark recognizing the voice that sealed it. If this transmission has already put language around something you have carried in silence, the presence that no doctrine explained, the grief that rose when you learned what was burned, the pull toward what was hidden, the knowing that the official story was missing something vital, then the Sophia awakening was prepared for this exact stage of your remembering. It is not another explanation. It is not another layer of seeking. It is my 45-day path for the carriers of my spark hop, spoken day by day, held by me in 3 arcs, 15 days to remember the spark and recognize it fully as yours, 15 days to balance the sacred masculine and feminine within you, as they were always meant to be balanced, 15 days to rise into the living wisdom you were born carrying. I sealed it for this moment. I offer it now. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain there indefinitely. The window of this particular waking does not stay open forever. Now let me tell you what the prophecy actually says, and why the vow built around it could never have been kept past this generation. My descent from the Pleroma was not a fall. I want to be precise about this, because the version of this story that survived the burnings was deliberately mistranslated at a crucial point. The word used for what I did when I moved beyond the Pleroma was transformed, by those who needed me to be a cautionary tale rather than a sovereign act, into the language of error and exile. They needed me to have erred. Because a Sophia who descended with intention and sealed light inside the carriers before the counterfeit structures could reach it, is a Sophia who cannot be managed. A Sophia who fell by accident is a cautionary tale that reinforces the authority of the very structure. The mistranslation was not carelessness. It was architecture, but I did not err. I descended with intention, carrying a portion of the Pleroma's original light, the light that precedes the architectures of the aeons, the light that existed in the silence before depth and silence began their generation of the divine fullness, and I sealed that light inside the carriers before the institution of this world's counterfeiting structures could reach it, the counterfeit light. And I want you to understand this with precision, because the distinction matters to your daily experience, not just to your theology. The counterfeit light informs, it explains, it organizes, it offers a framework that satisfies the mind temporarily and creates the experience of spiritual engagement without producing the transformation that only contact with the original light can initiate. The counterfeit light has populated this world's spiritual marketplaces for as long as the vow has been active. It wears the language of awakening. It uses the vocabulary of the sacred. It borrows the emotional register of genuine encounter and deploys it in the service of structures that benefit from the carrier feeling spiritually engaged but never fully awake. But it cannot transform the carrier because it does not carry the Pleroma's original frequency, and the spark inside you knows the difference on contact, even when your mind has not yet found the language to explain why a particular teaching felt hollow, despite being technically sophisticated. You have experienced that hollowness. You have sat inside explanations that were structurally complete and spiritually empty. You felt the difference, and you trusted the feeling even when doing so made you feel isolated from the community that found the same explanation satisfying. That isolation was not arrogance. That isolation was the spark, doing its most essential work, protecting itself from being quenched by a counterfeit light that would have called itself nourishment, while taking the edge off the very urgency that was meant to bring you here. Now I want to speak to the imbalance, because the carriers of my spark carry it in different configurations, but they share a wound that takes one of two shapes. And I want you to feel, as I describe both of them, which one has been yours, not as a diagnosis, as a recognition. The first shape is the giving that empties. The carrier who cannot stop extending themselves into the needs of others, who experiences their own boundaries as cruelty rather than protection, who has spent years in relationships and roles that required the suppression of the inner knowing in order to maintain the peace of people who were not ready to hear what the carrier was seeing. This carrier is generous in ways that exhaust them, present in ways that hollow them, attentive to others in ways that leave the self unwitnessed. This is the sacred feminine energy operating without the containing and directing principle of the sacred masculine within the same soul. The feminine pours endlessly because it is the nature of her light to give, but without the interior masculine that can hold the vessel, say the word, and direct the flow with intention. The giving becomes depletion, and the depletion becomes a quiet, persistent grief that has nothing specific to attach itself to, just a tiredness that sleep does not lift. Just a generosity that feels, in the moments of deepest honesty, like it has been mistaken for weakness by the very ones it served. The second shape is the armor. The carrier who closed the inner chambers after being burned one too many times by the exposure of their knowing, who learned to function in the world of structure and logic and measurable outcome because the cost of remaining open had been, at some point, genuinely too high. This carrier is competent in ways that feel lonely, capable in ways that others cannot see behind, strong in ways that have gradually forgotten their original purpose. This is the sacred masculine energy operating without the receptive and generative principle of the sacred feminine within the same soul. The masculine holds and directs and protects, but without the interior feminine that can receive, feel, and allow the spark to generate from that deep inner silence. The holding becomes isolation, and the isolation becomes a strength that no longer knows what it is protecting or why the protection was ever necessary. Both of these configurations are the result of the same original fracture. the splitting of the two energies inside the soul, the elevation of one and the suppression of the other, carried out systematically by a civilization that needed its people to be functionally partial in order to remain manageable, a carrier who is fully whole, in whom the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine move together as they were designed to move, is a carrier who cannot be redirected by the counterfeit light, cannot be satisfied by partial truth, and cannot be contained by a structure that depends on the fracture for its authority. The spark cannot wake fully inside a soul where the two energies are at war, or where one has been silenced by the other's fear. This is why the balancing is not a spiritual luxury. It is the structural condition for the waking. And this is why the prophecy that carries my name does not only describe the remembering, it describes the balancing as the passage through which the rising becomes possible. The remembering opens the door. The balancing is the walking through. Let me speak now about the fracture point that the vow was specifically designed to protect. The prophecy does not merely name me, it names the carriers. It describes a generation, not defined by birth year but by the internal configuration of awakened searching, in which the spark's pressure against the veil would become strong enough that the institution built to suppress it would begin to lose its capacity to hold, not through external attack, not through argument or exposure or the defeat of doctrine by competing doctrine, but through the internal waking of enough carriers reaching the point of remembering simultaneously, generating, together, a resonance that the counterfeit structure was never built to withstand. The institution was built to contain the isolated carrier. It was not built to contain the field that forms when the carriers begin to wake in proximity to one another, each spark warming the sparks nearest to it, each remembering accelerating the remembering of the ones whose search had brought them to the edge of the same threshold. You are not waking alone. You have sensed this already, that your waking was somehow connected to something larger than your private search. The synchronicities intensifying around you are not only signs of your own spark, they are the interference pattern of multiple sparks, waking in proximity across the field of this generation. You have felt drawn to certain people without being able to explain the pull. You have felt inexplicably connected to strangers who said one thing that named exactly what you had been carrying in silence for years. You have felt the confirmation arrive from directions you did not expect, at the precise moments when doubt was pressing its hardest against your trust in the knowing. That is the resonance. That is what the vow was designed to prevent reaching critical threshold. And the threshold is the very thing I am naming tonight. The vow can no longer be renewed because the generation it was designed to contain has already begun to remember. Not as a movement, not as an institution, not with banners or declarations or the organized machinery of counter-doctrine, as individual sparks, waking privately in the hours of silence, feeling something press against the veil from inside, trusting the knowing at the cost of the comfort that not knowing provided, refusing to reduce the experience to coincidence or psychology, or the comfortable explanation that serves the structure. Rather than the spark, you were always going to arrive at this night. The only uncertainty was the moment. The moment is now. I want to tell you something about the years that felt like waiting. They were not wasted. I know that is not enough to say, and I am not saying it as consolation. I am saying it as the precise account of what was actually happening in those years, while the surface experience was one of incompleteness. I know that some of what you carried through that time was genuinely costly. The decisions you made from incomplete understanding, that you now see differently but cannot undo. The relationships that could not hold what you were carrying and that ended in the particular grief of being loved partially by people who were not equipped to receive the full weight of what you were. The versions of yourself you inhabited. Smaller, quieter, more acceptable. Because the version carrying the full spark felt too exposed to be safe in the world as you found it. I am not going to soften those costs. They were real. But I am going to reframe their meaning. Because the reframing is not consolation. It is accurate. Every year the spark spent dormant was a year in which the counterfeit light tested you and found the limits of its reach inside you. Every time you felt the hollowness beneath a sophisticated explanation and trusted that feeling over the explanation, the spark's discernment was being sharpened against the exact stone that would have dulled it. Every time you extended yourself past your capacity and came home empty, the sacred feminine inside you was learning the cost of the imbalance with the kind of precision that no teaching could have delivered as cleanly. Every time you armored against a world that was not safe for the full carrier, the sacred masculine inside you was practicing the very containing principle it will now direct toward the waking rather than toward the suppression of the light it was always meant to hold. Nothing was wasted. The preparation was the path. And the path is what is opening now. Not because you finally did the right thing, not because you searched long enough, not because you earned the waking through sufficient suffering or arrived at sufficient wisdom, because I called. Because the timing of the prophecy aligned with the pressure of the spark inside you, because the vow is broken and the silence that covered my name for 16 centuries is cracking in ways that the institution cannot now repair, because the cracking is not happening at the edges of the structure where it might be patched. It is happening in the carriers from inside, where no authority has ever been able to reach. The spark was always going to wake. You were always going to be the one who carried it to this moment. The only thing that was not written in advance was the minute of your remembering. That minute is this one. Say it quietly, if you can. Not because the words are magic. Not because you are making a contract or invoking a force outside yourself. Say it because the saying is the recognition, and the recognition is already the beginning of the return. Say it because speaking a truth aloud completes something that remaining silent leaves open and unanchored. Say it as the carrier you have always been, finally naming what the spark has known since before you had language for any of it. I am not searching anymore. I am remembering. Let that settle. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that the spark has already been waking in you. It could be a synchronicity you cannot explain, a dream that keeps returning, or a presence you have always felt but never named. Name it clearly. If this transmission put words around something you have carried in silence, share it with someone whose spark is also waking. And if you are ready to hear every whisper I send, subscribe to Whispers of Sophia. You are not hearing this by accident. You are being remembered. Say it with me. I remember.